Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
A warm welcome to all my students. This is the second lecture for the topic or the subject in NPTEL, which is project management, and as you know, I am Raghunandan Sengupta, trying to cover all the details of project management as a course. So, continuing from the last lecture where we left, we discussed different type of books we are going to consider. We very briefly, even though I did not show in my slides, we considered the different type of concept we will cover. Then we went into the definition of what is a project and how it is different from the production concept of view from the engineering point of view, where the main emphasis in the project was one of its kind only concept, the work has to be done. And I did give a feel of to the audience that what can be the different type of projects related to building a dam, related to building a bridge, trying to come up with a marketing strategy, so on and so forth. And then also I mentioned that two different concepts of PERT CPM, just mentioned the names, obviously I will come to those later on. And then told that how QJERT, the concept of loops, which is basically the queuing JERT would be used in trying to basically find out the concept of how projects which are complicated can be done. So, continuing with that same flavor, so I will go into the more details of theory and then come into the problems later on. The two schools of project management are basically one school emphasizes the methods and the techniques for planning and controlling a project. So, planning and controlling in the project, if you remember in my first class, it was basically mentioned. I did repeat it quite few number of times, is that your main concern is try to finish the project within a stipulated time. And so, your time concept is important, and then later on if we consider the concept of resource and budgetary constraints, it has also a separate implication for the project. So, this can be referred, as I mentioned, for the first school where emphasis is on methods and techniques. This can be referred to the task perspective way of trying to handle, and the other emphasis is basically trying to analyze the human relationship, and this can be referred to as the organization perspective. So, our main focus is not from the second point of view, is mainly from the first point of view, where it is most task focused and how the task or the activities are related, and we try to basically utilize different type of simple quantitative techniques in order to solve the problems in the area of project management and try to understand how project management can be utilized. So, the method of project management from the point of view of the first concept, where activities, tasks are more important or are the focus. So, we will consider what is the scope of the project management and the concept of the risk, how risk concept is brought into the picture. I did mention in the first class the concept of risk which is there. Then we will consider the work breakdown structure rather than considering the overall micro level of each and every activities. We will consider the overall picture on a macro level. We will consider the cost estimation, how internal rate of return, how the expected values are considered. We will consider the Gantt chart, and then later on, as I mentioned, that we will go into the concept of PERT. Now, here is the first time that I am basically going to the details of what PERT is. So, PERT basically means the program evaluation review technique, that is based on the network with some concept of stochastic activity duration. Stochastic activity duration means the time duration is not fixed. So, there is a pessimist time, there is an optimist time, there is a so called median and a mean time, and we try to basically analyze the overall project time duration from the PERT perspective. And what is the duration of the time, we will also consider that, and how it is brought into the picture, we will consider that also. In the critical path method, it is basically concerned with determining the optimal duration of the project, where the duration of each single activity is known with certainty, without any uncertainty. So, there is a fixed time. So, obviously, there would be some difference in the PERT and the CPM concept, but we will slowly consider that how the concept of PERT and CPM can be utilized separately depending on time for the activities, or time for the set of activities are non-deterministic or stochastic and deterministic. After we finish the PERT and CPM, if you remember, I did mention about Q-JERT, JERT, and the name of Alan Pritzker I did mention just once in my first class as I was going through the syllabus. So, basically we will consider the generalized evaluation review technique and how generalized evaluation review techniques is different from PERT and CPM. We will highlight that also and try to solve simple problems. So, now what I want to mention before I go into the next slide is that I did mention a few minutes back is that in the concept of PERT and CPM, the concept of time duration being stochastic and deterministic is one of the main difference between the concept of PERT and CPM, such that once we consider them, you will understand what is the differences and how they can be taken into consideration for different projects where time duration is deterministic or whether the time duration is non-deterministic from the point of view of the project. So, there has been a changing philosophy of the concept of project management starting from when it was basically conceived the project. So, generally we will just go through the flow of the discussion and then come into the problem solving of project management as such. So, initial focus was on trying to obtain a control through more detailed planning and monitoring of each and every activities of the projects or the project as such, and trying to basically finish the project within time without laying much stress on, say for example, what would be the or what were the implication of trying to basically finish the work on time and its implication on the budgetary and the resource constraints which the set of persons or the project manager did face when he or she tried to finish off the project within a stipulated time. So, the present focus has changed from more from into the area of human relationship, cultural issues, but as I mentioned, we would not consider those for our studies, because our main focus would be to try to understand the different type of quantitative techniques which are utilized in the area of project management, mainly in the area of PERT and CPM. Risk management is also nowadays considered a very important and aspect of project management, and it is considered that the risk management can be one of the main tools how you try to analyze different type of projects, such that you can have a perspective that for different type of quantitative techniques which you use to solve the project, if you can basically lay more stress on the area of trying to analyze the risk from the perspective of the project, it basically gives you a much better picture that how things can be planned to basically meet the requirement on the project in the best possible way. Now, the concept of risk which I mentioned, that you may have learned risk from the point of view of statistics probability, you may have learned the concept of risk from the finance perspective, whatever it is, but generally the risk is considered as some sort of loss or a negative worth which basically accrues from taking that decision. So, our main focus would be to reduce the overall risk or the negative worth to the maximum possible extent, such that we are inclined to take that decision where the risk for that project or where the risk for the decision is the least, such that when we consider different type of projects from the point of view of the maximum return, that gives us certain results, which is fine, because I want to get the maximum worth is definitely a very good policy. Another way of trying to analyze a decision making process or trying to compare different projects would be basically rather to concentrate on the projects, such that we are able to take a decision on a project such that the overall risk is minimized. So, basically there are two different ways how you try to analyze the problem. So, brief history, as I mentioned for project management, it was basically in the area of spacecraft design where the concept of project management came out, but to give a very brief outline of that, I would definitely request the readers to have a look at the history of project management, because it may not be possible for me to go into the details of what are the historical perspective of project management, but I will just give you 2 or 3 bullet points in this area. So, development of the networks of scheduling techniques or precedent diagrams and this concept started in the 1950s, and the breakthrough came through developing of the US Polaris rocket. So, basically if you go into the YouTube or basically go into the Polaris study of Polaris, how it was developed, you will understand that how project management was used in the development of the Polaris rocket in a very big way. So, basically that can be considered as the work or as the project based on which project management as a concept basically came into the focus. Independently, the critical path method. So, if you remember just in the last slide I mentioned about PERT and CPM. So, independently CPM technique was developed by in the US by DuPont, while exploring potential application of their newly acquired UNIVAC computers. So, basically where different type of computers have to be scheduled in such a way that the processing power can be utilized, whether in different type of series or parallel combinations. There the concept of project management critical path method came into the picture. So, critical path method is a type of project management such that independently through the concept of Polaris rocket or independently through the work of DuPont, this concept of project management really came into the forefront. So, where its net worth of utilizing a project management concept was really appreciated by both the scientific community as well as by the people who are trying to utilize that in the practical scheme of things. So, importance of the project management with respect to the cost and the and schedule systems criteria for performance measurement, it is important to know 2 important principles for project management, which are it basically breaking the project scope down to the manageable unit or the units which you can manage, such that you can either look into the micro level of things or in the macro level of things, and controlling the progress using earned value concept. So, the earned value concept, to be very simple, we will try to basically find out that what is the net worth or what is the value which is basically being accrued based on the decision you are going to take. So, it basically need not be only the expected value, it can be basically the expected value considering all the different scheme of things, how you try to analyze the cost perspective, considering the rate of returns which are there, considering the time value of money. So, all these things would be considered, but in a very simplistic notion. So, as I mentioned in the first class, the concept of expected value and the time IRRs. So, those would be considered either on a standalone basis or collectively, such that they give you a much better view of how the project management concept can be utilized to get the maximum benefit. Another important achievement for project management community was the development of PMI or the project management scheduling concept. So, the first bit was published in 1987 and later revised in 2008. So, there they try to consider the different concept of project management techniques, as that they give you a very simple way of how you try to analyze a project rather than going to the detailed quantitative techniques of trying to solve it using optimization tools and so on and so forth. So, in the ANSI standard and the servers and serves it as a major reference document for good practices in the project management, and all the different ideas which are discussed in that book are considered as a as the tool or based on which the projects or project management can be analyzed. So, obviously, rather than going into the detailed qualitative techniques, I will try to basically analyze the problem from the quantitative techniques as such. So, as you remember, we had mentioned that nowadays organization focus is the main thrust area, but we will try to minimize it to the maximum possible extent and try to basically cover the project management from the point of view of the quantitative concepts. So, hence today it is equally important to address how can you motivate the project personnel to collaborate and to develop ownership of those set of persons who are trying to basically work on the project, such that the overall contribution of those set of persons is the maximum, such that considering the maximum utilization of the project management concept from the quantitative view, you can also align them in the area of how the human beings can basically be motivated to give the maximum benefit. Hence, team building and team composition has become an important factor in trying to analyze different areas of project management as such. Continuing with my main emphasis of risk management. So, why risk management is important? Risk management is today also considers important is considered important for a successful implementation of a project from the project management perspective. So, risk assessment has to be done and contingencies have to be allocated such that if any concept or techniques which is being utilized for the project management point of view, if it gives you a huge amount of risk from the point of view of so called loss, I am using the word loss in a very general sense. If it is used, then one can be sure that those concept of risk management which is trying to utilize, where the risk management concept can be used to decrease the overall risk perspective of a project. So, those techniques would definitely be used much in a much better way than those techniques where the risk perspective is not considered in that big way. It is important to forecast as accurately as possible all the potential deviations in the project and to provide adequate contingencies against them such that the overall variations. So, again I am using the word variation for the first time, which we generally known is basically the standard deviation in from the very simple concept of probability and statistics. So, we try to basically find out how the deviations and the overall the movement from the so called mean value or the median value of the idea of projects what we want to implement. It can be either the resource allocation, it can be the time allocations. They are considered in such a way that the variations are minimized. They may not be 0, but they are minimized to the maximum possible extent. In spite of efforts from our sides, cost and schedule overruns still happen. So, obviously, if costs, schedules and budget are there and if there are overflow based on that. So, obviously, it has a negative impact on the project which you are trying to implement. So, obviously, trying to find out what are important, whether the costs are important, whether the scheduling of the jobs are important, whether time factor is important, whether the resources is important. So, once we decide how we are going to do, obviously, we will try to utilize different techniques accordingly. Now, having said that, let us be a little bit more practical, that trying to analyze a project from all the point of view at the same time may not be possible. So, what is best is that trying to basically utilize the concept of project management where time constraint is more important and we try to basically find out the optimal time based on which we can finish up the jobs and how they can be rescheduled or crashed such that the overall perspective of trying to finish the project is done in the minimum possible time. So, as we do that, obviously, we slowly we then bring into the picture the concept of resources concept. So, obviously, resource concept could have also been taken as the first priority and then considering the cost perspective we could have taken that, but we generally would follow the principle which is generally studied in the books and try to basically analyze the problem from the point of view of time and then the cost structures would be coming into the picture. Thus, rather than focus, contingency planning is more important. So, contingency planning in the sense that if time is a constraint, that how the resources can be utilized in different sequences such that we get the maximum benefit from that, and there you will see that how the risk perspective would come into the picture. So, reason being, as I mentioned, that risk and variations are normal and cannot be fully done away with. So, avoided. Thus is important that we develop project management competence to manage the risk and the variation as they occur and try to reduce them to the maximum possible extent. So, hence many organizations have realized that too tight control prevents creativity. So, trying to basically give some leverage also gives you some leverage of trying to basically reduce the time as well as trying to basically reduce the cost, doing it in such a way that the overall risk perspective would be taken into consideration rather than only concentrating on the time or only concentrating on the budget constraints. So, thus less focus on detailed plans can encourage creativity and lead to better and more effective project execution and project management techniques being utilized. So, what is new in project management? We will consider later on, but I just wanted to mention it. Considering all this, researchers have focused on one new approach which has found wide applications in the development on information systems in trying to basically find out the concept of agile project management. But obviously, that would come as a later part in our discussion. We will basically consider more the concept of project management as a such and the techniques which we are going to consider, so that it gives a overall view that how project management can be done. So, agile project management is a method of project management applying a team approach. So, basically the input of different individuals are collectively considered such that the overall creativity is increased to the maximum possible extent. The course of the project is allowed to change rapidly and frequently, and this is obtained by strong focus on the stakeholders involvement and communications. So, in agile project management or environment, projects are the business. So, while in the traditional environment, the triple constraint of scope, resources and schedule is the main focus. So, basically you consider in agile project management, you consider in a very broad focus the concept of project in such a way that the concept of scopes or the times or the resources and the schedules which are there in the initial discussion of project management, which would be our main focus. So, that is done away with. So, collectively they are considered in such a way that the concept of project is basically considered from a holistic point of view, where it is more of a business and all these things are considered in a agglomeration fashion. In an agile strategy, the project manager takes on an outward facing perspective to facilitate the integration of the project to the business, such that the overall focus is the business, such that the project is dovetailed into the overall scheme. Focus in agile project management is on delivering business results rather than staying with present boundaries, as the original project boundaries will quickly diverge from the business reality as uncertainty environment becomes much more relevant as days go by, which means that the concept of risk should be taken in such a way that we will consider the risk to be an integral part of the overall system and try to analyze the project from the risk perspective, from the business perspective, considering everything is dynamic, such that not only cost, not only schedule, not only resources are considered, but more rather than all the things are considered in a one go as relevant for the project from the business perspective or the project as a standalone basis, which we are trying to work on. So, good examples of agile project management would be in the software industry. Agile project management is used applying a method called Scrum. In Scrum, the basic development unit is a sprint. So, basically we consider different type of agile project management concept in technology development, in trying to basically for the software development, but rather our focus would be for the solving problems would be more on the project management from the manufacturing perspective. So, in agile project management from the software industry, each sprint is preceded by a planning meeting where the tasks of the sprints are determined and they are basically identified and they are clubbed together in such a way the overall project is met from the business perspective as such. During a sprint, the project team will create parts of the finished product. Scrum teams consist of 3 core roles. So, what are the core roles are the product owner representing the voice of the customer. So, he or she gives the feedback what the customer wants, and based on that the overall development of the project is done. You see, for example, if the project the customer wants cost reduction, or if the customer wants more different type of facilities, different type of add-ons to be there, or say for example different type of functions to be there, obviously the manager who is looking after the overall project from the point of view of customer would give his or her feedback such that they are considered into the project in a very realistic sense. So, there is a development team responsible for delivering this finished parts to the final products. So, obviously, the development team would get the feedback of the customers, and they would basically act as a liaison team such that they would get the feedback from the customers as I mentioned, and they would try to basically get the feedback from the production line or from the technology development line, and try to basically bridge the gap between the customer and the main supplier on the main product development, such that the mismatch is reduced to the maximum possible extent, considering all overall business perspective, such that the cost perspective, the time perspective, the schedule perspective, everything can be taken at one go. The Scrum Master basically facilitating the process, and is given in charge of trying to basically bring a semblance in how the customer focus and the technology focus can be bring into the picture, such that as I mentioned that he or she as a team leader trying to basically ensures the dovetailing of the customer requirement and the technology team leader development team which is there. So, project success must be defined in terms of elements that characterize the very nature of the project. For example, time, adherence to schedule, adherence to the deadlines which are there are met. So, cost adherence to budgets, to the resource constraints which are there are also met, such that we are able to take both the time and the cost perspective. The quality functions, what are the quality features of the product, the functionality of the product, and how each and every part of the product meets the demand of the customer, that has to be looked into. The concept of customer satisfaction from the point of view of utilizing their product, from the point of view of trying to get the cost of the product transferred and being less, so that the customer is able to buy, or whether the customer is able to get the feedback from the customer service personnel in case of any problems are also taken into consideration. Project success follows a quadruple constraint considered basically from the point of agile production or agile project management, being time. So, time is important, as time was the only focus in the area of per 10 CPM. Then the second point is basically the cost perspective. So, the cost perspective is done in such a way that it also considers the concept of crashing of jobs, as we will consider more in the area of per 10 CPM. The quality and the functionality, which may be very qualitative in nature, still is brought into the picture. So, that is basically the main focus of the customer, because customer may be willing to pay some extra amount of money for a feature which is very important for him or her. And the last part is basically satisfaction level. So, rather than basically able to deliver a product, it also means that what is the qualitative features, such that the customer satisfaction is met to the maximum possible extent, is also considered. So, at one go we are able to consider the agile project management, the concept of time, cost, the quality and the functionality, and the client satisfaction, such that if you are able to consider all of them, the project can be implemented in the best possible manner. So, with this I will end the second lecture, and as we proceed, so I would request my students and the people who are taking the course to please refer to the books which I referred, because as such it would be very difficult for me to basically give in each and every point from the book, but I will definitely request them that if they go through this concept given in the book from all the references which are there, it will definitely give them a very good feel that how project management was taken up in the early years and how it has developed, such that he or she is in a much better frame of mind as we start the discussion of the problems in the later classes. Thank you very much.